Welcome back. I am Pemberton, and this is Book 1, Part 3, the close of the book. Abraham is gone, and the promise passes to Isaac, a quiet man with two restless sons, Esau the hunter and Jacob the dweller in tents. Here is the famous, and easy story of a birthright sold for a bowl of stew and a blessing taken by disguise, of Jacob's flight from his brother's anger, and the dream of a ladder reaching from earth to heaven, of his long years, and his hard bargain with Laban, and of the night by the ford when he wrestled until daybreak, and was given a new name, Israel. We will see the brothers meet again in fear and in tears, the dark business at Shechem, and finally the peaceful death of old Isaac. Let us finish Book 1.
A little while after this, Abraham died. He was a man of incomparable virtue, and God honored him in a way that matched his piety toward him. The whole span of his life was 175 years. He was buried in Hebron, with his wife Sarah, by their sons Isaac and Ishmael. Isaac's wife became pregnant after the death of Abraham. When her belly was greatly burdened, Isaac became very anxious and inquired of God. God answered that Rebekah would bear twins, that two nations would take their names from those sons, and that the one who appeared second would excel the elder. Accordingly, a little while later, as God had foretold, she bore twins. The elder was very rough and hairy from his head to his feet, but the younger took hold of his heel as they were being born. The father loved the elder, who was called Esau, a name suited to his roughness, for the Hebrews call such hairy roughness Esau or Sarah. But Jacob the younger was most loved by his mother. When there was a famine in the land, Isaac resolved to go into Egypt, since the land there was good. But he went to Gerar as God commanded him. There Abimelech the king received him, because Abraham had formerly lived with him, and had been his friend. At first Abimelech treated him with exceeding kindness, but envy prevented him from continuing in the same disposition to the end. When he saw that God was with Isaac and took such great care of him, he drove him away. Isaac, seeing how envy had changed Abimelech's temper, withdrew to a place called the Valley, not far from Gerar. As he was digging a well, the shepherds attacked him and began to fight in order to stop the work. Because Isaac did not wish to contend, the shepherds seemed to prevail over him, so he withdrew again and dug another well. When certain other shepherds of Abimelech began to use violence against him, he left that well also and withdrew once more, securing his safety by reasonable and prudent conduct. At last they allowed him to dig a well without disturbance. He named this well Rehoboth, which means a large space. Of the former wells, one was called Eskin, which means strife, and the other Sitna, a name that means enmity. At this time Isaac's affairs increased and became prosperous, and he obtained great riches. But Abimelech, thinking that Isaac stood opposed to him, and seeing that their way of life made them suspicious of each other, understood that his withdrawal showed a hidden enmity also. He was afraid that his former friendship with Isaac would not protect him if Isaac tried to avenge the injuries he had formerly done to him. Therefore Abimelech renewed his friendship with Isaac through Philok, one of his generals. When he had obtained everything he wanted because of Isaac's good nature, for Isaac preferred the earlier friendship Abimelech had shown to him, and to his father over Abimelech's later anger against him, Abimelech returned home. When Esau, one of Isaac's sons and the one whom his father especially loved, had reached the age of 40 years, he married Adah, the daughter of Helon, and Aholibamah, the daughter of Esabeam. Helon and Esabeam were great lords among the Canaanites. By doing this, Esau took authority on himself and claimed control over his own marriages, without even asking his father's advice. If Isaac had been the judge of the matter, he would not have allowed him to marry in this way, for Isaac was not pleased with making any alliance with the people of that country. But since he did not want to trouble his son by commanding him to put away these wives, he resolved to remain silent. When Isaac was old and could not see at all, he called Esau to him. He told him that, besides his blindness and the disorder of his eyes, his very old age hindered him from worshipping God by sacrifice. Therefore he told Esau to go out hunting, and when he had caught as much venison as he could, to prepare him a supper. After this, Isaac would make supplication to God, asking God to be Esau's supporter and helper throughout the whole time of his life. Isaac said that it was uncertain when he would die, and that he wished, by prayers for Esau, to secure God's mercy for him beforehand. Accordingly, Esau went out hunting. But Rebekah thought it proper that the supplication for obtaining God's favor should be made for Jacob, even without Isaac's consent. She told Jacob to kill kids of the goats and prepare a supper. Jacob obeyed his mother in everything she instructed. When the supper was ready, he took a goat's skin and put it around his arm, so that because of its hairy roughness his father might believe him to be Esau. Since the brothers were twins and alike in everything else, they differed only in this. Jacob did this because he feared that he might be caught in his wrongdoing before his father had made his supplications, and that instead he might provoke his father to curse him. So he brought the supper into his father. Isaac perceived him to be Esau. Suspecting no deceit, he ate the supper and then turned himself to his prayers and intercessions with God. O Lord of all ages, Creator of all substance, it was you who promised my father a great abundance of good things, who has granted to me what I have, and who has promised to be the kind supporter of my posterity, and to bestow still greater blessings on them. Therefore confirm these promises of yours, and do not overlook me because of my present weak condition, on account of which I pray to you most earnestly. Be gracious to this my son. Preserve him and keep him from everything evil. Give him a happy life and the possession of as many good things as your power is able to bestow. Make him terrible to his enemies, and honorable and beloved among his friends." Thus Isaac prayed to God, thinking that his prayers had been made for Esau. He had only just finished them when Esau came in from hunting. When Isaac realized his mistake, he was silent. Esau asked to receive from his father a blessing like the one his brother had received. But his father refused, because all his prayers had already been spent on Jacob. So Esau lamented the mistake. However, his father was grieved by his weeping and said that Esau would excel in hunting, in bodily strength, in arms, and in all such kinds of work. He and his posterity after him would obtain glory forever on those accounts, but still he would serve his brother. When Rebekah feared that Esau would inflict some punishment on Jacob because of the mistake concerning Isaac's prayers, she delivered Jacob from danger. She persuaded her husband to take a wife for Jacob from Mesopotamia, from among her own kindred. Esau had already married Basemath, the daughter of Ishmael, without his father's consent. Isaac disliked the Canaanites, and therefore disapproved of Esau's earlier marriages. This had made Esau take Basemath as his wife in order to please him, and indeed he had a great affection for her. Jacob was sent by his mother to Mesopotamia so that he might marry the daughter of her brother Laban. Isaac permitted this marriage because he yielded to his wife's wishes. Jacob therefore traveled through the land of Canaan. Because he disliked the people of that country, he would not lodge with any of them, but spent the night in the open air and laid his head on a heap of stones he had gathered together. At that time he saw a vision in his sleep. He seemed to see a ladder reaching from the earth up to heaven, with persons descending on it who appeared more excellent than human beings. At last God himself stood above the ladder, and was plainly visible to him. Calling Jacob by name, God spoke to him. "O Jacob, it is not fitting for you, the son of a good father, and the grandson of one who gained a great reputation for outstanding virtue, to be downcast in your present circumstances. Instead, hope for better times. With my assistance, you shall have a great abundance of every good thing. I brought Abraham here out of Mesopotamia when he was driven away by his kinsmen, and I made your father a happy man. I will not bestow a lesser degree of happiness on you. Therefore be of good courage, and continue this journey under my guidance, for the marriage you are pursuing so eagerly shall be completed. You shall have children of good character, and their number shall be innumerable. They shall leave what they have to an even more numerous posterity. To them and to their posterity I give dominion over all the land, and their descendants shall fill the whole earth and sea, as far as the sun sees them. Do not fear any danger, and do not be afraid of the many labors you must undergo. By my providence I will direct what you are to do now, and still more in the time to come." These were the predictions God made to Jacob. Jacob became very joyful because of what he had seen and heard. He poured oil on the stones, because on them the prediction of such great benefits had been made. He also made a vow that he would offer sacrifices on them if he lived and returned safely, and that if he came back in such a condition, he would give God a tenth of what he had acquired. He judged the place honorable, and gave it the name Bethel, which in Greek is interpreted the house of God. Then he continued his journey to Mesopotamia, and at last came to Haran. In the suburbs he met shepherds, with grown boys and maidens, sitting around a certain well. Since he wanted water to drink, he stayed with them and began to talk. He asked whether they knew a man named Laban and whether he was still alive. They all said they knew him, for he was not so insignificant a person as to be unknown to any of them. They said that his daughter fed her father's flock along with them, and that they wondered she had not yet come, because through her Jacob could learn more exactly whatever he wanted to know about that family. While they were saying this, the young woman came, together with the other shepherds who came down with her. They showed Jacob to her and told her that he was a stranger who had come to ask about her father's affairs. Pleased in the manner of children at Jacob's arrival, she asked who he was, where he had come from, and what he needed that had brought him there. She also wished that it might be in their power to supply what he needed. "There is a relationship between you and me older than either your birth or mine, if you are the daughter of Laban. Abraham was the son of Terah, as were Haran and Nahor. Bethuel, your grandfather, was the son of Nahor. Isaac, my father, was the son of Abraham and Sarah, who was the daughter of Haran. But there is a nearer and later bond of kinship between us, for my mother Rebekah was the sister of Laban your father, by the same father and mother. Therefore you and I are cousin germans. I have now come to greet you and to renew the kinship that properly belongs between us." Jacob was overcome, not so much by their kinship or by the affection that might arise from it, as by love for the young woman and by amazement at her beauty, which was so flourishing that few women of that age could rival it. When Rachel heard Rebekah mentioned, she wept, as young people commonly do, out of the kindness she had for her father. She embraced Jacob, for she had learned about Rebekah from her father and knew that her parents loved to hear her name spoken. After greeting him, she said that he brought the most desirable and greatest pleasure to her father and to all their family, since her father was always mentioning his mother and always thinking of her alone, and that this would make Jacob equal in his eyes to any advantageous circumstance whatever. Then she told him to go to her father and follow while she brought him there, so that he would not deprive Laban of such a pleasure by staying away from him any longer. She then brought him to Laban. Once his uncle acknowledged him, Jacob was safe, being among friends, and he brought them great pleasure by his unexpected arrival. A little while later, Laban told him that he could not express in words the joy he felt at his coming. Still, he asked the reason for Jacob's arrival, and why he had left his aged mother and father when they needed to be cared for by him, and said he would provide him with all the help he needed. Jacob then explained the whole reason for his journey. He said that Isaac had 2 sons who were twins, himself and Esau. That Esau, because he had missed his father's prayers, which by his mother's wisdom had been offered for Jacob, sought to kill him, as one deprived of the kingdom that was to be given him by God, and of the blessings for which their father had prayed. This, Jacob said, was why he had come there, as his mother had commanded him. He added that they were all brothers to one another, but that his mother valued an alliance with Laban's family more than one with the families of the country. Therefore he looked on Laban and God as the supporters of his travels, and considered himself safe in his present circumstances. Laban promised to treat Jacob with great kindness, both on account of his ancestors and especially for the sake of his mother. Laban said he would show kindness to Rebekah, though she was absent, by taking care of Jacob. He assured him that he would make him chief shepherd of his flock and give him sufficient authority for that purpose. When Jacob wished to return to his parents, Laban would send him back with gifts, and in a manner as honorable as the closeness of their kinship required. Jacob heard this gladly. He said he would willingly and with pleasure undergo any kind of labor while he stayed with Laban, but he asked for Rachel as his wife as the reward for those labors. He esteemed her for other reasons, but also because she had been the means of his coming to Laban, and he said that love for the young woman forced him to make this proposal. Laban was well pleased with the agreement and consented to give her to him, since he did not desire a better son-in-law. He said he would do this if Jacob would stay with him for some time, because he was unwilling to send his daughter among the Canaanites, and he repented of the alliance he had already made by marrying his sister there. Jacob agreed and consented to stay 7 years. He resolved to serve his father-in-law for that many years so that, by giving a proof of his virtue, it might be better known what sort of man he was. Jacob accepted the terms. When the time was over, Laban made the wedding feast. But when night came, without Jacob perceiving it, Laban put his other daughter into bed with him. She was older than Rachel, and not beautiful in appearance. Jacob lay with her that night, because he had been drinking and because it was dark. When day came, he realized what had been done to him and reproached Laban for dealing unfairly with him. Laban asked pardon, saying necessity had forced him to do what he did. He said he had not given Jacob leave from any wicked design, but because he had been overcome by a greater necessity. Nevertheless, nothing would prevent Jacob from marrying Rachel also. After he had served another 7 years, Laban would give him the woman he loved. Jacob submitted to this condition, for his love for the young woman did not allow him to do otherwise. After another 7 years had passed, he took Rachel as his wife. Each of these wives had handmaids given by their father. Zilpah was handmaid to Leah, and Bilhah to Rachel. They were by no means slaves, though they were subject to their mistresses. Leah was deeply troubled by her husband's love for her sister, and she expected to be better regarded if she bore him children. So she continually entreated God. When she bore a son, and her husband was for that reason more reconciled to her, she named her son Reuben, because God had had mercy on her in giving her a son. That is the meaning of the name. After some time she bore 3 more sons. The first was Simeon, a name meaning that God had heard her prayer. Then she bore Levi, the confirmer of their friendship. After him Judah was born, which means thanksgiving. But Rachel feared that her sister's fruitfulness would make her enjoy a smaller share of Jacob's affection, so she put her handmaid Bilhah in bed with him. By her Jacob had Dan, a name that may be interpreted in Greek as a divine judgment. After him came Nephilim, as it were unconquerable in stratagems, because Rachel had tried by this stratagem to conquer her sister's fruitfulness. Accordingly, Leah used the same method and opposed her sister's stratagem with one of her own, putting her own handmaid in bed with Jacob. Jacob therefore had by Zilpah a son named Gad, which may be interpreted fortune, and after him Asher, which may be called a happy man, because he added glory to Leah. Reuben, Leah's eldest son, brought mandrake apples to his mother. When Rachel saw them, she asked Leah to give her the apples, because she longed to eat them. Leah refused and told Rachel to be content that she had deprived her of the affection she ought to have had from her husband. Rachel, in order to soften her sister's anger, said she would yield her husband to her, and he should lie with her that evening. Leah accepted the favor, and Jacob slept with Leah by Rachel's permission. Leah then bore these sons, Issachar, meaning one born by hire, and Zabulon, one born as a pledge of benevolence toward her, and she also bore a daughter, Dina. After some time Rachel had a son named Joseph, which meant that another should be added to him. Jacob fed the flocks of Laban his father-in-law all this time, for 20 years. After that he asked his father-in-law for permission to take his wives and go home. When Laban would not allow it, Jacob planned to do it secretly. He therefore tested the disposition of his wives to learn what they thought of the journey, and they appeared glad and approved it. Rachel took with her the images of the gods that, according to their laws, they used to worship in their own country, and she fled together with her sister. The children of them both, the handmaids, and the possessions they had went with them. Jacob also drove away half the cattle without letting Laban know beforehand. The reason Rachel took the images of the gods, although Jacob had taught her to despise such worship, was that if they were pursued and captured by her father, she might have recourse to these images in order to obtain his pardon. After one day, Laban learned of the departure of Jacob and his daughters. He was greatly troubled and pursued them, leading a band of men with him. On the 7th day he overtook them and found them resting on a certain hill. He did not interfere with them then, because it was evening. But God stood by him in a dream and warned him to receive his son-in-law and daughters peacefully, not to venture on anything rashly or in anger, but to make a league with Jacob. God told him that if he despised their small number and attacked them in a hostile manner, he would assist them. Having been forewarned by God, Laban called Jacob to him the next day to treat with him. He showed Jacob what dream he had had, and relying on it he came confidently to him and began to accuse him. He said that he had received Jacob when he was poor and in need of everything, and had given him plenty of all things. Laban said that he had joined his daughters to Jacob in marriage and supposed that Jacob's kindness to him would be greater than before. But Jacob had shown no regard either for his mother's relation to Laban, or for the newly made family tie between them, or for the wives he had married, or for the children whose grandfather Laban was. He had treated Laban as an enemy, driving away his cattle, persuading his daughters to run away from their father, and carrying home the sacred paternal images that Laban's forefathers had worshipped and that Laban himself had honored with the same worship. In short, Laban said, Jacob had done this though he was his kinsman, his sister's son, the husband of his daughters, and one who had been hospitably treated by him and had eaten at his table. When Laban had said this, Jacob made his defense. He said that God had not implanted love of one's native country in him alone, but had made it natural to all men, and therefore it was reasonable that, after so long a time, he should return to it. As for the prey Laban accused him of driving away, Jacob said that if anyone else were judge, Laban would be found in the wrong. Instead of the thanks Jacob ought to have received from him for both keeping and increasing his cattle, Laban was unjustly angry because Jacob had taken with him only a small portion of them. As for Laban's daughters, Jacob said they did not follow him home because of any evil practices of his, but because of the natural and just affection wives have for their husbands. They therefore followed not so much Jacob himself as their own children. This much of his apology was made to clear himself of having acted unjustly. He then added his own complaint and accusation against Laban, saying that while he was Laban's sister's son, and while Laban had given him his daughters in marriage, Laban had worn him out with harsh commands and kept him under them for 20 years. The service required in order to marry Laban's daughters had indeed been hard, but Jacob admitted it was tolerable. The commands laid on him after those marriages were worse, and such as even an enemy would have avoided. Laban had certainly treated Jacob very badly. When he saw that God was assisting Jacob in everything he desired, he promised that among the young cattle to be born, Jacob should sometimes have those that were white and sometimes those that were black. But when those that fell to Jacob's share proved numerous, Laban did not keep faith with him, but said he would give them to him the next year, because he envied the multitude of Jacob's possessions. He made the same promise as before because he thought such an increase could not be expected, but when it became reality he deceived him. As for the sacred images, Jacob told Laban to search for them. When Laban accepted the offer, Rachel, being informed of it, put the images into the camel saddle on which she rode and sat on them. She said that her natural purgation prevented her from rising. So Laban stopped searching any further, not supposing that his daughter in such circumstances would approach those images. He then made a league with Jacob and bound it with oaths, promising not to bear him any malice because of what had happened. Jacob made the same kind of league and promised to love Laban's daughters. They confirmed these agreements with oaths made upon certain stones, on which they erected a pillar in the form of an altar. From this that hill is called Gilead, and from it they call that land the land of Gilead to this day. After they had feasted following the making of the league, Laban returned home. As Jacob continued on his journey to the land of Canaan, angels appeared to him and gave him good hope concerning his future condition. He named that place the camp of God. Wanting to know what his brother intended toward him, and being afraid because of the enmities between them, he sent messengers to give Esau an exact account of everything. He charged those who were sent to say that Jacob had thought it wrong to live together with Esau while Esau was angry with him, and therefore had gone out of the country. Now, believing that the long time of his absence must have healed their differences, he was returning. He brought with him his wives, his children, and the possessions he had obtained, and he delivered himself, together with what was dearest to him, into Esau's hands. He would consider it his greatest happiness to share with his brother what God had bestowed on him. The messengers delivered this message to Esau. Esau was very glad, and went to meet his brother with 400 men. When Jacob heard that Esau was coming to meet him with such a number of men, he was greatly afraid. Still, he committed his hope of deliverance to God, and considered how, in his present circumstances, he might preserve himself and those with him, and overcome his enemies if they attacked him unjustly. Therefore he divided his company into parts. He sent some before the rest, and ordered the others to come close behind, so that if the first were overpowered when his brother attacked them, they could flee for refuge to those who followed. When he had arranged his company in this order, he sent some of them to carry presents to his brother. The presents consisted of cattle and a great number of four-footed animals of many kinds, such as would be very acceptable to those who received them because of their rarity. Those who were sent went at certain intervals from one another, so that, by following one after another in close succession, they might appear more numerous. In this way Esau might lessen his anger because of the gifts, if he was still in a passion. Instructions were also given to those sent to speak gently to him. Jacob made these arrangements throughout the day. When night came, he moved on with his company. After they had crossed a certain river called Jabbok, Jacob was left behind. There he met an angel and wrestled with him, the angel beginning the struggle. Jacob prevailed over the angel. The angel then used a voice and spoke to him in words, urging him to be pleased with what had happened and not to suppose that his victory was a small one. He had overcome a divine angel, and he should regard the victory as a sign of great blessings that would come to him, that his offspring would never fall, and that no man would be too strong for his power. The angel also commanded him to be called Israel, which in the Hebrew language means one who struggled with the divine angel. These promises were made at Jacob's request, for when he perceived that this was the angel of God, he asked him to reveal what would happen to him afterward. When the angel had said what has been related, he disappeared. Jacob was pleased with these things and named the place Phanuel, which means the face of God. Because he felt pain in his broad sinew from this struggle, he himself abstained from eating that sinew afterward, and for his sake it is still not eaten by us. When Jacob understood that his brother was near, he ordered his wives to go ahead, each by herself, together with the handmaids, so that they might see what the men did if Esau was disposed to fight. Then Jacob went up to his brother Esau and bowed down to him. Esau had no evil design against him, but greeted him. He asked about the company of children and women, and after he had learned everything he wanted to know about them, he asked Jacob to go along with him to their father. But Jacob pretended that the cattle were weary. So Esau returned to Seir, for that was his place of habitation. He had named the place Roughness, from his own hairy roughness. After this, Jacob came to the place still called Tents, where Succoth to this day. From there he went to Shechem, a city of the Canaanites. While the Shechemites were keeping a festival, Dina, the only daughter of Jacob, went into the city to see the finery of the women of that country. But when Shechem, the son of Hamor the king, saw her, he defiled her by violence. Being greatly in love with her, he asked his father to obtain the young woman for him as a wife. Hamor agreed to his son's desire and came to Jacob, asking him to permit his son Shechem to marry Dina according to law. Jacob did not know how to refuse the request of a man of such great dignity, yet he did not think it lawful to marry his daughter to a stranger. So he asked Hamor to allow him to consult about what Hamor wished him to do. The king went away hoping that Jacob would grant the marriage. But Jacob informed his sons about the defilement of their sister and about Hamor's request, and asked them to advise what they should do. Most of them said nothing, because they did not know what advice to give. But Simeon and Levi, the brothers of the young woman by the same mother, agreed between themselves on the following action. It was now the time of a festival, when the Shechemites were occupied with ease and feasting. Simeon and Levi fell upon the watch, while they were asleep, entered the city, and killed all the males, including the king and his son. But they spared the women. When they had done this without their father's consent, they brought away their sister. Jacob was astonished at the greatness of this act and severely blamed his sons for it. But God stood by him and told him to be of good courage, to purify his tents, and to offer the sacrifices he had vowed to offer when he first went into Mesopotamia and saw his vision. Therefore, as Jacob was purifying his followers, he came upon the gods of Laban, for he had not known before that they had been stolen by Rachel. He hid them in the ground under an oak in Shechem. Leaving that place, he offered sacrifice at Bethel, the place where he had seen his dream when he first went into Mesopotamia. When Jacob had gone from there and come opposite Ephrata, he buried Rachel there because she died in childbirth. She was the only one of Jacob's kindred who did not receive the honor of burial at Hebron. After he had mourned for her a long time, he called the son born from her Benjamin, because of the sorrow his mother had with him. These are all the children of Jacob, 12 males and 1 female. Of them 8 were legitimate, 6 from Leah and 2 from Rachel, and 4 were from the handmaids, 2 from each. All their names have already been set down. From there Jacob came to Hebron, a city situated among the Canaanites, and that was where Isaac lived. They lived together there for a little while, but Jacob did not find Rebekah still alive. Isaac also died not long after his son arrived, and his sons buried him with his wife in Hebron, where they had a monument that belonged to them from their forefathers. Isaac was a man beloved by God, and after Abraham his father he was granted great acts of God's providence. He lived to be exceedingly old, and after living virtuously for 185 years he died. Since Josephus says in his preface that Moses wrote some things enigmatically, some allegorically, and the rest in plain words, it is worth observing how he treats the opening of Genesis. In his account of the first chapter of Genesis and the first 3 verses of the second, he gives no hint of any mystery at all. But when he comes here to verse 4 and what follows, he says that Moses, after the 7th day was over, began to speak philosophically. It is therefore not very unlikely that Josephus understood the rest of the 2nd and the 3rd chapters in some enigmatic, allegorical, or philosophical sense. The change in the name of God at this very place, from Elohim to Jehovah Elohim, from God to Lord God, in the Hebrew, Samaritan, and Septuagint, also gives some support to such a change in the narration, or its construction. We may also observe here that Josephus supposed man to be composed of spirit, soul, and body, as Paul does in 1 Thessalonians 5:23, and as the rest of the ancients did. Elsewhere he also says that the blood of animals was forbidden to be eaten because soul and spirit are in it. It is hard to say where the strange notion came from that 4 of the greatest rivers in the world, 2 of them running at vast distances from the other 2, somehow watered paradise. Yet this idea is not peculiar to Josephus. As Dr. Hudson says here, it comes from older authors. Since Josephus has already appeared to allegorize this history, and since he notices that these 4 names had particular meanings, we may perhaps misunderstand him if we suppose he means those 4 rivers literally. He gives Whiston for Ganges, meaning a multitude, Phrath for Euphrates, meaning either a dispersion or a flower, Diglath for Tigris, meaning what is swift with narrowness, and Jin for Nile, meaning what rises from the east. This is especially doubtful with Jin or Nile, which he says rises from the east, though he knew very well that the literal Nile rises from the south. What further allegorical meaning he had in view is now, I fear, impossible to determine. By the Red Sea, Josephus does not here mean the Arabian Gulf alone, which is what we now call by that name, but the whole southern sea, including the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf as far as the East Indies, as Ryland and Hudson correctly note from the old geographers. From Josephus's account it appears that he thought several of the brute animals at least, and particularly the serpent, could speak before the fall. I think few of the more perfect kinds of those animals lack the organs of speech even today. There are also many reasons that may lead one to think that their present state is not their original state, and that their capacities were once much greater than we now see them and are capable of being restored to their former condition. But concerning this most ancient, authentic, and probably allegorical account of that great event, the fall of our first parents, I have somewhat more to say by way of conjecture. Since it is only conjecture, I omit it except for this: the imputation of the sin of our first parents to their posterity, any further than as some cause or occasion of man's mortality, seems almost entirely groundless. Both man and the other subordinate creatures are hereafter to be delivered from the curse then brought on them, and at last to be delivered from the bondage of corruption, as Romans 8:19-22 says. St. John's explanation of why God accepted Abel's sacrifice and rejected Cain's, and why Cain killed Abel because Abel had been accepted by God, is much better than Josephus's account. I mean John's statement that Cain was of the evil one and killed his brother, and that he killed him because his own works were evil and his brother's righteous, in 1 John 3:12. Josephus's reason seems no better than a pharisaical notion or tradition. From Jubal, not improbably, came Jobel, the trumpet of Jobel or Jubilee, that large and loud musical instrument used in proclaiming liberty in the year of Jubilee. The old tradition says that Adam's children numbered 30, 3 sons and 20, 3 daughters. What Josephus says about Seth and his posterity, that they were very good and virtuous, and at the same time very happy, with no considerable misfortunes for 7 generations, agrees exactly with the state of the world and the conduct of Providence in all the earliest ages. On Josephus's mistake in taking Seth the son of Adam for Seth or Sesostris, king of Egypt, the builder of this pillar in the land of Syria, see the essay on the Old Testament, Appendix, pages 159 and 160. The main substance of the story may indeed be true. Adam may have foretold a conflagration and a deluge, which all antiquity witnesses to have been an ancient tradition, and Seth's posterity may have engraved their astronomical discoveries on 2 such pillars. Yet it is in no way credible that those pillars could survive the deluge, which buried all such pillars and buildings far underground in the sediment of its waters. This is especially so since the similar pillars of the Egyptian Seth or Sesostris existed after the flood in the land of Syria, and perhaps in Josephus's own day also, as is shown in the place just referred to. The notion that fallen angels were, in some sense, the fathers of the ancient giants was the constant opinion of antiquity. Josephus here supposes that the life of these giants, for I understand him to mean only them, was now reduced to 120 years. This is confirmed by the fragment of Enoch. As for the rest of mankind, Josephus himself admits that their lives were much longer than 120 years for many generations after the flood, as we shall soon see. He says they were gradually shortened until the days of Moses, and then fixed for a time at 120. Nor do we need to suppose that either Enoch or Josephus meant to interpret these 120 years concerning human life before the flood as different from the 120 years of God's patience, perhaps while the ark was being prepared, until the deluge. I take that to be God's meaning when he threatened that wicked world. If they continued impenitent for so long, their days would be no more than 120 years. A cubit is about 21 English inches. Josephus correctly determines here that the year at the flood began about the autumnal equinox. As for the day of the month on which the flood began, our Hebrew and Samaritan texts, and perhaps Josephus's own copy, more rightly place it on the 17th day instead of the 27th as here. Josephus agrees with them about the distance of 150 days to the 17th day of the 7th month, as in Genesis. Josephus also notices that these ancient genealogies were first written down by those who lived at that time, and from them were transmitted to posterity. I suppose this is the true account of the matter. There is no reason to imagine that men were not taught to read and write soon after they were taught to speak, perhaps all by the Messiah himself, who under the Father was the creator or governor of mankind, and often appeared to them in those early days. This place of descent is the proper rendering of the Armenian name of this very city. It is called Naxuana in Ptolemy and Ichuan by Moses Cornensis, the Armenian historian, but at the place itself Nachichuan, which means the first place of descent. It is a lasting monument of Noah's preservation in the ark on the top of that mountain, at whose foot it was built, as the first city or town after the flood. Moses Cornensis also says elsewhere that another town was said by tradition to have been called Saron, or the place of dispersion, because the first dispersion of the sons of Xisuthros or Noah was made from there. Whether any remains of this ark are still preserved, as the people of the country suppose, I cannot say for certain. Not very long ago Monsieur Tournefort wished to see the place himself, but he met with too many dangers and difficulties to venture through them. One observation should not be overlooked concerning the Ethiopic war that Moses, as general of the Egyptians, brought to an end, and about which our recent writers seem very unconcerned. It was a war of such consequence that it caused the removal or destruction of 6 or 7 nations descended from Mitzrayim, along with their cities. Josephus would not have said this if he had not had ancient records to justify his assertions, though those records are now all lost. Josephus rightly affirms that the Jews were called Hebrews from their ancestor Heber, not from Abram the Hebrew, or the one who crossed the Euphrates, as many modern writers suppose. Shem is also called the father of all the children of Heber, or all the Hebrews, in a history long before Abram crossed the Euphrates. It must be admitted that in Genesis, where the original says they told Abram the Hebrew, the Septuagint renders it the passenger, but this is spoken only of Abram himself, who had then lately crossed the Euphrates, and is another meaning of the Hebrew word taken as a descriptive term, not as a proper name. It is worth noting that under the law of Moses God required no sacrifices, except from the 5 kinds of animals he here required of Abram. Nor did the Jews eat any other domestic animals than the 3 named here, as Roland observes. As for the affliction of Abram's posterity for 400 years, see the later account. Lot's sons-in-law, as they are called in Genesis, may have been so styled because they were betrothed to Lot's daughters, though not yet married to them. Josephus says that Lot's wife's pillar of salt was standing in his day, and that he had seen it. Its standing then is also attested by Clement of Rome, who was contemporary with Josephus, and its standing in the next century is attested by Irenaeus, with an added hypothesis about how it lasted so long with all its parts entire. Whether the reports of some modern travelers are true, that it is still standing, I do not know. Its remote situation, at the southernmost point of the Sea of Sodom, in the wild and dangerous deserts of Arabia, makes it extremely difficult for inquisitive travelers to examine the place, and common reports from country people at a distance are not very satisfactory. In the meantime, I have no opinion of Leclerc's dissertation or hypothesis about this question, which can be determined only by eyewitnesses. When Christian princes, so-called, lay aside their foolish and unchristian wars and quarrels and send a body of suitable people to travel through the East to bring us faithful accounts of all ancient monuments and obtain copies of ancient records now lost among us, we may hope for full satisfaction in such inquiries, but hardly before. I see no properly wicked intention in Lot's daughters when, in a case that appeared to them to be an unavoidable necessity, they contrived to become pregnant by their father. Without such unavoidable necessity, incest is a horrible crime. But whether in such a necessary case, as they understood this to be according to Josephus, it was such a crime, I am not satisfied. Still, their making their father drunk and carefully concealing what they did from him shows that they despaired of persuading him to an action which, at best, could only be very suspicious and shocking to so good a man. It is also well worth observing that Josephus here directly calls God the principal angel who appeared to Abraham and foretold the birth of Isaac. This language of Josephus prepares us to believe that his other expressions, that Jesus was a wise man, if it is lawful to call him a man, and that God was the Word in his homily concerning Hades, may both be genuine. Nor does the other expression, divine angel, used both presently and earlier, have any different meaning. Josephus here calls Ismail a young child or infant, though he was about 13 years old. In the same way Judas calls himself and his brothers young men when he was 47 and had 2 children, and they were of much the same age. A girl 12 years old is also called a little child 5 separate times in Mark 5:39-42. Herod is likewise said by Josephus to be a very young man at 25. Aristobulus is styled a very little child at 16 years of age. Domitian is also called by him a very young child when he went on his German expedition at about 18 years of age. Samson's wife and Ruth, when they were widows, are also called children. It should be noted that both here and in Hebrews 11:17, Isaac is called Abraham's only begotten son, though Abraham at the same time had another son, Ismail. The Septuagint expresses the true meaning by rendering the text as the beloved son. There is also a plain error in the copies that say King David later built the temple on Mount Moriah, since it was certainly no one other than King Solomon who built that temple, as Procopius indeed cites from Josephus. It was certainly David, and not Solomon, who built the first altar there, as we learn from 2 Samuel, 1 Chronicles, and Josephus's Antiquities. It seems both here and in God's parallel blessing to Jacob that Josephus had as yet no notion of the hidden meaning of that most important and most eminent promise, "In thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed." Paul says that Scripture does not speak of seeds as of many, but of one, and to thy seed which is Christ. Nor is this surprising, since Josephus was, I think, not yet a Christian. And even if he had been a Christian, since he was certainly, until the latter part of his life, no more than an Ebionite Christian, and the Ebionites above all the apostles rejected and despised sin. Paul, it would be no great wonder if he did not follow Paul's interpretation here. In the meantime, we have in effect St. Paul's explanation in the Testament of Reuben, which charges his sons to worship the seed of Judah, who would die for them in visible and invisible wars, and would be among them an eternal king. Nor should we despise the observation of a learned foreigner of my acquaintance, who notes that seeds in the plural must mean posterity, while seed in the singular may mean either posterity or one single person. In this promise that all nations would be happy in the seed of Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, the word is always used in the singular. I will add that it is sometimes, as it were, paraphrased as the son of Abraham, the son of David, and so on, which admits no such ambiguity. The birth of Jacob and Esau is here said to have happened after Abraham's death, but it should have been after Sarah's death. The order of the narration in Genesis, which is not always exactly according to the order of time, seems to have led Josephus into this error as doctor. Bernard observes here, for Sarah and Josephus, the context requires that we read Esau or Sarah, since the two signify the same thing. The supper of savory meat, as we call it in Genesis 27:4, which was to be caught by hunting, was plainly intended for a festival or sacrifice. Since prayers were frequent at sacrifices, Isaac expected, as was then usual in such eminent cases, that a divine impulse would come upon him, so that he might bless the son present and foretell his future conduct and fortune. Therefore, when Isaac had unknowingly blessed Jacob and afterward realized his mistake, he still did not try to change it, however earnestly his affection for Esau may have made him wish it could be changed. He knew that this blessing came not from himself, but from God, and that altering it was beyond his power. A second afflatus then came upon him, and enabled him to foretell Esau's future conduct and fortune also. Whether Jacob or his mother Rebekah was more to blame in this deception of Isaac in his old age, I cannot determine. Still, since the blessing was delivered as a prediction of future events by a divine impulse, and since it foretold things that would happen to the posterity of Jacob and Esau in later ages, it was certainly providential. It was also in agreement with what Rebekah knew to be God's purpose when he answered her inquiry before the children were born, saying that one people would be stronger than the other, and that the elder Esau would serve the younger Jacob. Whether Isaac knew or remembered this old oracle, which in our copies was delivered only to Rebekah, or whether, if he knew and remembered it, he tried to alter the divine determination, because of his fondness for his elder and worse son Esau, to the harm of his younger and better son Jacob, as Josephus elsewhere supposes, I cannot say for certain. If so, this may have tempted Rebekah to contrive the deception and Jacob to carry it out. However, Josephus says here that it was Isaac, not Rebekah, who first inquired of God and received the oracle mentioned above. If this is the true reading, it makes Isaac's conduct more inexcusable. Nor was it probably anything else that so much encouraged Esau earlier to marry two Canaanitish wives without his parents' consent as Isaac's unfortunate fondness for him. By the deprivation of the kingdom that was to be given Esau by God as the firstborn, it appears that Josephus thought a kingdom derived from God was due to the one whom Isaac should bless as his firstborn. I take this to be the kingdom expected under the Messiah, who therefore was to be born from the posterity of the one whom Isaac blessed. Jacob, by obtaining the blessing of the firstborn, became the true heir of that kingdom in opposition to Esau. Here we have the difference between slaves for life and servants such as we now hire for a time agreed on by both sides, and dismiss again after the contracted time is over. Such servants are not slaves, but free men and free women. Accordingly, when the apostolical constitutions forbid a clergyman to marry perpetual servants or slaves, it means only the former sort, as we learn elsewhere from the same constitutions. Concerning these 12 sons of Jacob, the reasons for their several names, the times of their births and the intervals here assigned, their excellent characters, their faults and repentance, the events of their lives, and their prophecies at their deaths, see the testaments of these 12 patriarchs, still preserved at large. I formerly explained these mandrakes, as we, with the Septuagint and Josephus, render the Hebrew word dudaim, as the Syrian mocks, following Ludolphus. But I have since seen a very probable manuscript account by my learned friend Mr. Samuel Barker concerning what we still call mandrakes and their description by ancient naturalists and physicians. This inclines me to think that those mentioned here were really mandrakes and nothing else. Perhaps this may be the proper meaning of the word Israel, according to the present and Old Jerusalem analogy of the Hebrew tongue. In the meantime, it is certain that the Hellenists of the 1st century, in Egypt and elsewhere, interpreted Israel to mean a man seeing God, as is evident from the argument cited earlier. Concerning the slaughter of the Shechemites by Simeon and Levi, see the authentic records. But why Josephus omitted the circumcision of the Shechemites as the occasion of their death, and Jacob's great grief as described in the testament of Levi, I cannot tell. Since Benoni means the son of my sorrow, and Benjamin means the son of days, or one born in the father's old age, I suspect that Josephus's present copies are imperfect here. I suppose that, in agreement with other copies, he wrote that Rachel called her son's name Benoni, but his father called him Benjamin, as in Genesis 35:18. As for Benjamin, commonly explained as the son of the right hand, that makes no sense at all and seems to be only a gross modern error. The Samaritan always writes this name truly as Benjamin, which probably has the same meaning here, only with the Chaldee ending in instead of the Hebrew im, just as we pronounce cherubim or cherubim indifferently. Accordingly, both the Testament of Benjamin and Philoin on the change of names write the name Benjamin, but explain it not as the son of the right hand, but as the son of days.
And the book 1 ends, with Isaac buried by his 2 sons at Hebron, and the family of Israel 12 sons now, a nation in miniature poised on the edge of the long descent into Egypt. For among those sons is one named Joseph, whom his brothers will sell, and who will rise to rule the kingdom of the Nile. That is where book 2 begins. Thank you for sitting with the whole of book 1, from the first day of the world to the grave at Hebron. Mind the footnotes, and beware the folly.